Quote, Love, unquote, by New Amsterdam. Chapter 12. The trip back to their apartment is quiet. Or maybe it only seems that way. Kirishima goes through the motions like he's underwater, insulated from sound and clear vision and touch. By the time he surfaces for air, he's sitting in their living room, unsure of exactly how he got there. Ashido is leaning over him, hands on her hips and brows furrowed. Kirishima, are you okay? He shakes his head, hopes that it will clear his mind some. Sure. Yeah, what were we talking about? Kaminari, sitting perched on the arm of the couch, lets out an exasperated breath. Our tour with your favorite band, maybe? Oh, right. They'd been in Kayama's office, and she'd been going over our plans for them. They have one more concert opening for Present Mike, and then she wants them to go on tour as soon as their album comes out. And she wants them to go on tour with Sanida, Jiro says, from the other side of the couch. I wouldn't have put the two of us together, but it makes a certain amount of sense. Plus, we couldn't ask for better exposure. Ashido's still leaning over Kirishima, trying to look him straight in the eye, even though he keeps turning away from her. You're supposed to be bouncing off the walls, she tells him. What's wrong? He's daydreaming about his boyfriend, Kaminari huffs. No, I'm not, Kirishima protests. He doesn't know what he's feeling. Was it really just 12 hours ago that he was sitting in the diner with Bakugou, feeling happier than he's ever been? It was a perfect moment, like a scene in a snow globe, untouchable and preserved. Sure, Kaminari says, disbelievingly. Leave him alone, Jiro says lightly. We wouldn't have that kind of traction we do right now if he hadn't gotten our names into every tabloid in the country. Because that was the point, Kirishima reminds himself. It wasn't about him actually falling in love with Bakugou. It was about Riot getting famous, and Bakugou preserving his own career. It wasn't about the two of them as individuals at all, and he needs to stop thinking about it that way. Ashido lays a hand on his shoulder, and Kirishima finally looks up. Ashido's eyes are liquid dark, round with concern. She's startlingly beautiful in that moment, her cheeks flushed a subtle pink, her long lashes accentuated by her dark eye makeup. But maybe what makes her so striking, just then, is the emotion in her eyes. It's raw concern, like she's aching for him, alone. Kirishima sucks in a breath. I don't know if I want to go on tour right now. Kaminari smacks a hand against his forehead, and Jiro's face takes on a pinched look. Ashido holds up a hand before either of them can say anything. Explain, she says. Kirishima folds his hand in his lap, dropping his gaze from Ashido. He wonders if Bakugou would be disappointed in him for his indecision. He wants to be a man of conviction, who can just reach out and take what they want. But he's not like Bakugou. He has none of that certainty. What he may have wanted before has been eclipsed by something else. It's months on the road, he says, thinking through it even as he speaks out loud. We'll be all over the country, in a different city every night. We wouldn't be back home for weeks and weeks. So? Ashido asks, not unkindly. So, Kirishima says. And suddenly his voice is miserable. Suddenly there's a heat in his eyes, and he feels like he's gonna cry. He's letting them all down, he knows he is. They've been in this together from the start, the four of them. And now he's gonna be the one who ruins everything. He sucks in a breath, tries to keep himself together. So, nothing. It's fine. Let's go on tour. Kirishima! 3 voices say his name in unison, so harshly it's like a pianist hitting the wrong note in the middle of a song. He looks up and sees them all staring at him, matching expressions of frustration on their faces. Dude, Don't do that, Kaminari says, wrinkling his nose in distaste. Don't say that you think we want you to, Shiro continues, with a soft sigh. Just because you're doing it for us. We don't want that, Ashido says. Her brows crease into an angry V over his eyes. Why would we want that? We love you, Kirishima. We want you to be happy. The other two nod solemnly. The dam breaks. Looking at them, feeling their concern and love, Kirishima folds in on himself. He rests his forehead against his knees, and his shoulders start to shake as the tears come. Furious and angry, they roll down his cheeks even as Ashido sits herself on one side of him, and Kaminari takes his place on the other. They lay their hands on his back, gentle and reassuring. But Kirishima can't stop crying. I don't know what to do. The words come out in between sobs, like they're being ripped out of his throat. I don't want to have to choose. Even a week ago, the thought of touring with Sanida would have filled him with nothing but joy. The idea of standing up on the same stage as Amajiki Tamaki is beyond his wildest dreams. Playing to the same audiences, standing in the same signing lines, spending time with one of his idols. It's too good to be true. But the past few months with Bakugou have been exhilarating in a completely different way. The small moments he's built up with Bakugou, the thin string of connection between them that's grown stronger and stronger. How could he give that up? I really like him, Kirishima says, aware that he's not making any sense. I like him so much. And if I leave, it's not real. We're not together. If I leave, it's gonna end. From beside him, Kirishima lets out a hiss. You really are stupid. Kirishima rubs at his eyes, pulling himself up. Immediately, Ashido puts a hand around his shoulders and pulls him against her side. He rests his head against her shoulder, feels the warmth of her body and the solid comfort of her presence. We should have seen this coming, Kaminari is saying, shaking his head. What? Kirishima asks, breathless. Jiro is hugging her legs against her chest, chin against her knees. I think what Kaminari means is that when you first started acting like Bakugou's boyfriend, we should have known you wouldn't have been able to keep your feelings out of it. You're right. This is his fault. I'm sorry. He doesn't know what else there is to say. No, Kaminari says, so fiercely it startles him. No, shut up. You're not the one who's supposed to be sorry. We're sorry. We shouldn't have let you do this. We should have protected you. What? Kaminari looks him straight in the eye, and his eyes are red, like he's about to start crying too. You care about everyone, Kaminari says, like an accusation, and we're supposed to know that better than anyone. This was bound to happen, and we let it. Kirishima looks around at the three of them, all with equally guilty expressions on their faces. No, he protests. No, it's not your guys' fault. How could you even think that? Jiro's lips pull into a thin smile. Maybe it's because you're sitting here, miserable, and it all happened on our watch. That doesn't make it your fault. Kirishima rubs his hands over his face, trying to get his thoughts straight. If I feel guilty for making you guys feel guilty about how I feel, we're just gonna keep going like this forever. Kaminari barks out a laugh, punches Kirishima lightly in the side. You really fell for him, didn't you? You fell for Bakugou Katsuki. Kirishima doesn't know what to say to that. It's not inaccurate. He feels something for Bakugou. Can't stop thinking about that last kiss. but his feelings aren't as simple as he'd like them to be. Looks that way, doesn't it? He says, thinking to the photo on Twitter. Whatever is happening between the two of them, it's out there for the entire world to see. He can't shield it. We won't go on tour unless all four of us agree to it, Eijirou says, toying with the ends of her bangs. She isn't usually the decision maker, and maybe that's why she looks down to the ground when she says it. No, guys, you can't worry about me. Kirishima, shut up, Cautionary says, slapping his hand down on the crown of Kirishima's head. You brought us together, Eijirou says. We're not going to do anything, unless you're on board with it too. Kirishima starts crying again. But these aren't tears of despair. Rather, it's as though happiness is leaking out of him, too big to be contained in his chest. You guys, he says, his voice watery and rough. But if you decide we're not doing this, you get to tell Kayama-san that, okay? Cautionary says, winking. Eijirou kicks him. Knock it off. Kirishima laughs, even though the sound comes out as like being scraped from the back of his throat. When he has a moment to think, he realizes that Ashido hasn't said anything, though she hasn't moved her arm from around him. He looks up at her questioningly. Could the two of us talk? She says, while Eijirou and Cautionary are distracted by each other. Alone? They step into Kirishima's bedroom a minute later. Kirishima gestures Ashido to take a seat on the bed, and only happens to glance out his window as he moves to join her. He gasps at what he sees, shock going through him like an arrow into his heart. Bakugou's billboard, the Best Jeanist ad, the one that went up weeks and weeks ago, before any of this started, is being plastered over in white. Workers are preparing the billboard for a new ad, and as they do, they systematically erase Bakugou's fiery image. The provocative jut of his hips in those jeans is already gone, as is the sharp angle of his bare arm, and now they're working on the pale color of his hair. It shouldn't hurt the way it does, but Kirishima physically reaches out, as though he can stop the work that's already been done, as though he can keep that image of Bakugou preserved and whole, as though he can keep the real Bakugou to himself. Kirishima, Ashido says sharply, grabbing at his wrist. What are you doing? Kirishima shakes his head, rubbing the back of his hand over his eyes. He needs sleep. He needs to get himself together, and to get his emotions in check. That's why everything seems so bad right now, isn't it? Because he was out until the middle of the night, and slept on Bakugou's couch, and ran to get to the meeting at Kayama's office on time. He just hasn't had the time to process, or rest, or do anything at all. When he's settled himself, none of this will feel quite as bad. He has to believe that. He slumps down on the bed beside Ashido, lying flat on his back as his legs dangle over the side. Staring at the ceiling, he asks, "What was it you wanted to talk about?" Beside him, Ashido stifles a sigh. Kirishima was right. We should have seen this coming. You don't have to say it like that, Kirishima mumbles. Like what? Like it's a tragedy, Kirishima breathes out. Liking someone, isn't it supposed to feel good? That's what he's always tried to write into his songs. A love that fills you up from the inside, and then spills out of you because it's too strong to be contained. Like drinking champagne too fast, and feeling the bubbles rising through your body until you're giddy with them. Bakugou has made him happy, hasn't he? Where is the happiness gone? If it's not tragic, then why are you looking like that? Ashido asks. She flops back, so they're lying side by side. Next to Kirishima's broad chest, she's slim and slight. Her shirt rides up a bit, revealing the curved line of her stomach and her rosy skin. He takes a moment to think about it, to figure out how he feels. "I don't know what to do," he admits, whispering the words like a secret. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Ashido hums, reaching up and resting her hands behind her head. "Can I tell you a story?" He has always known her to be flighty, to jump from one topic to the next, to be more concerned with herself than the people around her, in a nonchalant but not unkind way. But right now, he doesn't think she's changing the subject. "Okay," he says. She's silent for a moment, still staring at the ceiling instead of looking at him. Then, "I really did love Sero, you know?" Kirishima doesn't interrupt, just nods. He's not sure she can see the motion. "I mean, I was 17, and some people think you can't love anyone when you're that young, but I think I loved him more because of that. He's good, you know? He's funny, and he's down to earth, and he doesn't take crap from anyone. He never let anything faze him, even me. And I was a big deal, you remember that?" Kirishima laughs this time. He remembers Ashido at 17. Bright pink hair and a bigger smile, commanding presence and killer voice. He remembers standing behind her on stage and thinking, "She's it. She's everything a star should be." "You were like a hurricane," he tells her. "Right?" Ashido laughs too. "I mean, maybe I should be embarrassed by how much of a diva I was, but I don't think I'd do it any differently now. But somehow, Sero got that about me. He anchored me. I really, really love that about him. He talked to me like I was a real person, but also like he'd follow me anywhere. I barely knew what to do with that, how he felt about me." He blinks at her phrasing. Not how she felt about him, but how he felt about her. "But we had our problems too," Ashido says with a labored sigh. "I got an offer I don't know if you ever heard about it, but my publicist wanted me to write a song for a TV show, then perform it for cross-promotion and stuff. And Sero and I had a huge fight about it." Ashido remembers the fight, but not what caused it. When had Ashido been on a TV show? "I didn't end up doing it," she says, like she's read his mind. Because of what we've been fighting about. Sero asked me, he said..." She cuts herself off with a deep breath. "It's okay," Kirishima says. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to." "No," Ashido insists. "I have to tell you, Kirishima, because I don't want to see you do something stupid, or something you'll regret when I could have helped you." They're both silent for a beat. "Sero asked me if it was all worth it, if I wanted to be famous more than anything else, more than I wanted to be with him." The words curve around Kirishima's heart and squeeze. "Ashido..." She smiles sadly. "I didn't know. I loved him, sure, but I loved being a performer too, and I thought, I'm 17. What happens if I give up this life for him, and then we don't last? What if he doesn't love me as much as I love him? What if he doesn't love me anymore, and I'm not a famous idol? What then?" Kirishima can't imagine Sero's feelings changing for such a reason. But as he's quickly learning, maybe he never knew much about Sero and Ashido's relationship at all. "Not knowing I wasn't good enough," Ashido says. "And so he moved on, and so did I. And then 6 months later I quit. Being an idol wasn't what I wanted. But Sero was already gone by then, so I had neither of the things I thought I wanted." Only now does Kirishima realize why Ashido's telling him this story. Suddenly, he can't get enough air. His throat is closing up, constricting his breathing. I'm not telling you what to do, Ashido says. And I don't regret it, not really. I love what my life is now. I love being in Riot and performing with all of you. But you've got to make that choice for yourself, Kirishima. I want you to be happy, and I want you to get whatever it is you want. But if you're giving up one thing, I want you to make sure the other is worth it. Ashido had given up a real relationship to chase her own dreams. And Kirishima is what, by comparison? A couple of stolen moments with a much larger lie. He hears the warning in Ashido's words. I think you're like Sero in a lot of ways, she says idly. A lot of good ways, I mean. But I'm scared that maybe Bakugou is like me. He did start this whole thing just to save his career. And are you sure that's not the only thing he's after? What if he doesn't like you as much as you like him? Ashido is asking. What if you give up your career, and at the end of it, you don't even have him? Ashido shakes his head, draping one arm over his eyes. Fuck, he mutters. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Ashido curls up next to him, laying her head against his chest. Be selfish, Kirishima. Make a decision for you and not for anyone else. But do it with your eyes open, okay? He lets his arm drop down onto her shoulders, bolstered by her warmth. What would I do without you? He mutters. She pokes him in the side. That's my line, mister. He still has no idea what he should do. But for a moment, he's content to just lie beside her. That is, until a moment later, when he looks up and glances out the window and sees all that's left of Bakugou's best genus dad. One startlingly bright red eye, smouldering as it looks out at him from an otherwise blank canvas of white. That eye stares at him, like it's pinning him to the spot, like it's reminding him of something. Maybe it's a blessing that Kirishima's life is so hectic. It keeps him from thinking too much, at least. Even when he hasn't decided what to do about the tour, when he hasn't managed to get a hold of Bakugou in 2 days, he can't really dwell on it. Because tonight is Riot's last concert opening for Present Mic. The atmosphere is different tonight, even though they've played this show countless times. One of the managers bursts into their dressing room an hour and a half before they're supposed to go on, and insists on decking them out in new outfits. Kirishima's usual black tank is replaced by a furiously crimson one, with Riot stamped across it in black lettering. Jiro gets one in purple, Kaminari in yellow, and Ashido one in pink. We'll sell more of them if we wear them, I guess, Kaminari says, pulling his tank over his head. He's wearing a black choker around his neck, a small metallic lightning bolt dangling from it. His jeans are black, so tight they might as well be painted on. With his long legs and jaggedly cut hair, he's like lightning in a bottle. His energy is hectic, but somehow contained in these moments before they get on stage. Kirishima feels like he's leeching his strength off all of them as they get ready to take the stage. Ashido's cheer and Kaminari's energy and Jiro's focus. He'll need all three if he's going to make it through tonight. Before the lights have gone down, he looks out at the crowd, at the VIP box. Amajiki Tamaki is there, accompanied by his bandmates and his boyfriend, Tagata Mirio. Beside them, a man with shaggy black hair is leaning back in his seat. Kirishima blinks, because he can swear that the man is dozing off, despite the din around him. But beside him is Bakugou. Kirishima swallows roughly. Bakugou isn't looking towards the stage, not yet. He's wearing a black button-down and has his arms crossed over his chest. His expression is neutral, for him, which means he looks like he's ready to commit murder. And Kirishima's in love with him. He's so in love that just looking at Bakugou hurts. Like there's something inside of him that's grown too big for his chest and is about to burst out. He's here, Ashido says from beside him. But she's not looking at Bakugou. She's looking to the seat beside him, where Sero is sitting. He's leaning forward, elbows against his knees, like he can't wait to see the show. Kirishima reaches for Ashido's hand. He's seen our shows before, he reminds her. He always comes with Bakugou, doesn't he? From Ashido's other side, Jiro sucks in a breath. Yeah, but in those shows, we didn't have a bunch of new songs to play. Including one that's about Sero, Cautionary finishes, brows inching upwards towards his hairline. It's fine, Ashido says definitively. She pulls away from Kirishima and snaps her fingers. I'm a professional, you know, and this is fine. When they're on stage, Kirishima can breathe easily for the first time in days. Music has always been like that for him. It pulls him into a different world, where the only things that matter are the sounds and the feelings. Everything that's been swirling around inside of him, love and confusion and indecision and despair, they seem to leave him as his fingers strum the strings of his guitar, as Ashido sings his words to the crowd, as Cautionary bangs out a beat and Jiro pulls off a particularly skillful solo. This is the world he's always wanted to be in. Why would he? How could he give this up for anything? This time, he's barely aware of Bakugou in the crowd. He can't be, because if he looks towards where he knows Bakugou is, that'll break the spell. He'll be pulled out of the peace of this moment, and all of his feelings will come roaring back to the surface. And right now he can't afford that. They play a particularly long set, new songs littered amongst the ones they've been playing for months. As their time on stage winds down, Ashido pulls her mic off its stand and addresses the crowd. I hope you've all been having a good night, she says, and the crowds roar in response. Laughing, Ashido fluffs her hair. Well, save some of that energy for present mic, will you? It'll be our secret that you liked us best. The crowd laughs, clapping and cheering. Ashido has that way with him, always manages to charm them entirely by the time Riot leaves the stage. But now her voice drops just a little lower, and her smile fades into something more open and honest. We have one more song to play for you, she says. It's incredibly special to me, and I hope you listen to it with all your heart, because we've put all our hearts into it. She takes a step back, and Cautionary taps out a slow, gentle beat. Ashido replaces her mic on its stand and wraps both her hands around it. The first words come easily. Ashido stares out at the crowd as she sings, the rest of them playing the simple melody that Kayama-san had approved of that day. They strum their guitars slowly, and Ashido's voice falls like stones into a stream, soft and deliberate. But as the song gets more honest, the longer it goes on. It starts out with a romance, and turns to something darker, something selfish and raw. And as Ashido is carried away into the current of the song, her voice cracks. She hitches a breath, and then she stops singing entirely. Kirishima glances up, and realizes that Ashido is looking straight out into the crowd, to where she knows Sero is sitting. She's looking at him, and she's frozen. Cautionary tapers off and is playing, staring at Ashido. Jiro's fingers falter a minute later. The song peters out, noise echoing through the stadium, as the crowd begins to murmur restlessly. This can't be happening. Ashido doesn't freeze. She's the confident one, the one who was made for the spotlight. She's the one that carried them this far. But she isn't moving, isn't singing. Something's gone terribly wrong. She's never asked Kirishima to write a song for her, from her, before. And so maybe she's never bared herself so fully to a crowd, never been so honest in her singing. He's moving before he's even really thought about it. One moment, Kirishima is standing back and to the side, and the next, he's standing right next to Ashido, guitar still in his hands. He strums out the opening bars of the melody again, like they're shifting back into the song. He pauses, then plays them again. But Ashido doesn't join back in, doesn't start singing. Kirishima is looking at Ashido when he begins to sing. He's still strumming out that melody, and the words come easily. It's like being back in that recording booth, with just him and Ashido, not realizing they had an audience. He sings, and he plays the song he wrote for her, the one in which he tried his best to understand her feelings, and melded them with some of his own, his perception of Bakugou, and his perception of Ashido, and the feelings shared between all those people he cares about so much. He sings them, and his voice carries from the stage out over the crowd. Ashido blinks up at him, wetness in her eyes that shines golden under the stage lights. But she sings with him then, their voices mingling once more, deep and rich and high and intense. They look at each other and sing, and around them there is utter silence from the crowd. They stop singing at once, as Kirishima plays the last few notes on his guitar. On cue, the lights of the stage dim. "Kirishima," Ashido whispers, hands coming up over her mouth. "You were singing." He's still a bit dazed when the noise finally reaches him. The enormous din of the crowd as they cheer and cheer and cheer, a mix of "Riot" and "Kirishima" and "We love you." The sound rushes up around him, like he's just dunked his head underwater, like he's in the ocean, and the current is pulling him under. He's too numb, too stunned to feel anything like horror or fear at what he'd just done. Because he wasn't singing for himself just now. He'd been singing for her, for Ashido, and for another person out in the crowd, like a single luminous star in the distance.